Adam Dalhaus, welcome.
Hello, hello. Thanks for having me, man.
And you have friends with you today?
I do. This is Ben and Anastasia. They are a young couple that I met through a mutual friend of mine, and they started playing the game outside of me just like having them over and showing them the game. They were playing it on their own, and they just had some really cool stories. And so I thought I'd bring them on and have people see it from their perspective.
Awesome. Welcome. Glad to have you.
Thank you, guys. Yeah.
So for people that don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name's Adam Dalhaus, and in 2021, me and my wife released the game, The Unseen, You Have Been Chosen. Originally, this concept was a story that I had written as a teenager to be a comic book.
Oh, wow.
And I tried to get into art, and I just couldn't. There's a whole backstory to that I'm not going to get into. But anyways, fast forward years later, I really fell into tabletop gaming, and I just absolutely was like drawn to role-playing games and miniatures and all this other stuff. And all of a sudden, it just hit me like a truck. I go, wait, it's not a comic book. It's like an interactive comic book. It's like a tabletop game. And all of a sudden, the story from my teenage years just started flooding back. And I was describing how the verse in the Bible to my wife, I said, for we're not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world. And I'm like, wouldn't it be so cool if there was a story where you actually got to see what you looked like in the spirit realm as you were fighting against these principalities?
Yeah.
So the concept is that the living word actually comes alive, and those are your weapons. And going up against enemies like doubt, guilt, fear, sickness, suffering, and hatred, and things like that. And so it's more from there's a game out there called Deliverance, which is also spiritual warfare based, but it's based from like the angel and demonic spiritual warfare. Whereas this one's more from the human side of depending upon your prayer and your guidance and praying for discernment, which actually becomes your weapons. And so you still get that dungeon crawl feel of like fireballs and lightning and swords and arrows and everything else, but it's set in a modern day setting in a spiritual realm. So you have angels that come and fight with you and various different kinds of things. And the big part of this game is I really wanted it to be a story that would engross you. There's a novel that goes with it that you can read. That's the prequel to all the characters. But if you just want to play the game, it's kind of an isolated story in itself too. But there's a lot to it. There's the main campaign, which is an audio-driven story, and then there's also 7 different other ways to play the game, and then there's a PvP on the other side. Oh, wow. So there's a lot packed in one box. So.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. How long have you been working on it?
So I started it kind of hit me like a truck, like I said, back in April of 2015. And so from there, it just kind of, I didn't know anything about game development. I didn't know anything about Kickstarter. I didn't do Kickstarter. In hindsight, I wish I would have known and done things a little bit differently. But when I started looking out there and seeing if there was anything out there that was like it, at the time, there was nothing. And I'm like, I have really nothing to base what I'm doing off of, at least that I knew of. I found the CGDC. I went out there when it was a fledgling thing. But at first, I was like, this is just a fun hobby. And people came over and started playing it. And then they're like, dude, like, I need this game. Like, can I take this with me? I'm like, well, it's just kind of for fun. And they're like, no, we will buy this game if you make this game. And I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I'm making a game now. And so I just passionately went into it. And I was writing the novel while I was making the game. And then I really wanted it to be a miniatures game. So there are 19 highly detailed miniatures in the game that are resin casted. They're super high end. And that was a big passion of mine because I love miniature games, something that you can paint and craft and get into and then expand on hopefully in the future. So, but I couldn't find an artist. I got ripped off. I hired an artist to come in and do some of the art. And I wouldn't say he got ripped off. That's not fair. He had a lot of stuff going on in his life with his wife and his job and everything else, and he just couldn't do it. So, and I didn't have the heart to ask him for the money back that I gave him. So I didn't get really any of the art that I was hoping to get. And God kind of drew me to start drawing again. He's like, I want you to start drawing. He's like, go get an iPad. I want you to do this. I started hearing this in my spirit. And me and my wife were broke. And I'm like, I think God wants me to like get an iPad and start drawing. She's like, well, you better do it. And that was really weird. So I did. I went out, I got an iPad, and I started messing around with Procreate, and I started drawing. And it just started coming back to me. And I'd see a piece of scripture, And that scripture would be a sword or a dagger or a weapon or a prayer or a fireball or a meteor or something. And so in probably about 3 months, I had all of the art done for the game.
Oh, wow.
And from the pencils to the inking to the shading to the effects. And, I had gone to art school a little bit when I was younger, but I hadn't drawn in years. And I was very it was challenging, but it was kind of this roller coaster. So I kind of did all of it. So it's my writings, my art. There was one person that donated the board art for me. He was a friend of mine. He's like, I just want to be a part of this, man. And he actually hand painted the entire game board on a giant canvas. I mean, this canvas was the size of this table. It was huge. And he hand painted it while he was moving. And I would take pieces of it and then structure it into the game board you've seen now. So yeah, it's quite a journey. I could probably talk about this for a longer time than we have.
Well, I want to hear about it from a player's perspective.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Good to meet you all. Benjamin, this is my wife, Anastasia. Like Adam had mentioned, we met Adam and his wife through a mutual friend. And I was born and raised in the mountains and was a outdoor fanatic. And so I was never a part of the gaming world. Adam and the Unseen is my first introduction into any tabletop game or gaming in general. And Anastasia also similarly grew up in Reno and this wasn't a part of our culture. So Adam...
I played Sorry.
Yes. Sorry, okay. And so we had met Adam and we were just talking to him over dinner and getting to know him and his wife. And they mentioned that, they had invented this board game. And that night at dinner, that first night, I knew I needed to just encourage Adam. And it was so powerful. I felt the Lord was telling me there's very few people that take initiative to create. I'm a photographer and owned a fine art gallery for a number of years. And to see somebody dedicate himself to a craft and then in that also give that craft to the Lord and to glorify God, it was something that was super rare to me. And I was like, I've never gamed before, but I am about what you're about, because this is just really powerful to see. And so, yeah, he invited us over to play the Unseen with him and his wife and some other friends. And it was so much fun. I was completely amazed that, here I am, usually climbing and mountain biking and backpacking, I'm around a game table. And I think that first day we spent, 8 hours. And
yeah, it was a long session.
I was I felt like
it was 30
minutes. It felt like 30 minutes. And I was like, we have not been here all day. This is amazing.
Can we do one more chapter?
Yeah.
Can we just do one more chapter? It's I'll call into work tomorrow, man.
Yeah. It was so good. I think what that first time through the game for me, what really impacted me about the Unseen is there's such a clear overlying story to the entire campaign. So each zone that you walk through, it represents a house on a residential neighborhood. Okay. And inside of that house, there's a captive. And so as you progress through the game, you're essentially in the unseen world, you're praying for the release and the destruction of bondage over that captive in that room. And so you have a captive in one room who's bound to guilt or fear or sickness. And you're with your team playing against the game board to liberate that person from just the lies and brokenness that they've believed. And that really resonated with me. I've been in situations where I've been bound by depression and brokenness and isolating in my bedroom, and to see how friends and people in the family of God can come together and fight for you. That message needs to be heard, And
So you also said something recently because you guys were playing with a bunch of friends, and you posted something about where the angels showed up at the very end. It was like this V formation. You guys were. It was like that scene at the end of Avengers where like the camera's panning around and you're just like ready to fight. Those moments where you're like up against the wall and you're all burdened and you're getting ready and you're like one bad roll and we're getting crushed.
Yeah.
And then an angel comes in and just like smites the area, and then you get burdens taken off you. Can you tell me about what you were saying the other day?
Yeah, for sure. So after we'd played with Adam and his wife, we were like, just like he had mentioned, we were like, we need this game. We're buying it.
Well, we actually bought the game before Adam taught us how to play.
We just wanted to support them.
Because I had heard, I was a part of a missionary group locally, and I had heard rumors of it, and I was like, man, I need to get my hands on this game. Like, I need to talk to these people. Like, there was just something stirring in my spirit, and I was like, I need to get involved somehow. So then we go to our mutual friend's birthday party, which is where we met him, and I was like, oh my gosh, you're the guy! Send me your way. We bought the game that night, and Adam, he's still small business, right? That's how you would consider?
It's beyond small.
Well,
not for long, everybody.
I'm like that. I'm like the poster child. I'm like replace the cat that's like hanging onto the branch. I'm like hanging there, kitten. But I'm a lot heavier than a kitten, so I'm like barely hanging on. It's very small. Yes.
The structure that he has right now, he had some time where he was like, hey, I can come over and I'll show you guys, I'll teach you guys. And so that's where we first learned how to play. And so I remember we were going up against the Monarch of Fear, or the Counselor of Fear, that's what he's called. And just looking at him, there was something stirring in my own heart and spirit, and I just... I felt kind of sick. I didn't want to look at him. I didn't want to kill it. I didn't want to be involved. I was like, I feel grossed out right now. And so even as Benjamin talked about from kind of an outside perspective, getting like a objective view of it, there's also times in the game where you're able to relate to the situation. And I was struggling with a lot of fear in that moment. And so Adam and Linda and Benjamin all sat and prayed for me. And I actually haven't struggled with fear since. And so there was a deliverance of lies or whatever that I was believing. And this game brought an avenue to have that address, bubble up, and then be delivered from feeling fearful. So,
and I also believe in when you play any good game, video game, board game, doesn't matter, is that the mechanics should tell the story just as much as the story is being told. So when you're making an action or you're taking an action, that it's significant to it's telling the story as you're progressing. Yeah. So it's not like I'm just praying and something is happening. I really intentionally wanted you to strive for every action that you take in the game. So there is this level of stress. I heard that I was playing with 15 kids the other day. There was 2 tables, and one kid came up to me. We were playing PvP. He's like, PvP is just awesome, man. But he's never played the regular side of the board with the campaign. He's like, and the other kid's like, man, the other side is totally different, but it's super stressful. But it's really cool, And then he's like, I never even rolled a D20 before. And he's like, I didn't even know that that's what that was called. And so something that was really important to me is I really wanted to use polyhedral dice in the game that are used with most role play games. And I wanted to build a mechanic out of that. Not so familiar that it's like D&D or anything, but something that utilizes, integrates those type of dice. Yeah. And so with the variables of the game, one of the things, and I don't know, you guys can tell me if you think this, but the one thing I hear is every time I play it, I have a different experience.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And so absolutely. Maybe you guys can talk a little bit.
Yeah. And so the first time we had played with Adam, I think we did more than half the game in one session. And then we came back the very next weekend or something and finished the game.
Wow.
And then we had the copy of our own, and we had a number of friends, just, single friends and friends in our community that we are already just pouring our lives into and helping, just build community. And so we're like, hey, this is what we're doing. We're having a game night. And so we created a Monday night game night every week. And we have our friends come. We have a friend who drives over an hour to Carson just to play with us.
Wow.
And in that campaign, it's taken us, nearly 3 months, because we just play like one chapter at a time for maybe an hour, 45 minutes each time. But even in that experience, with not having Adam there, running the game on our own, man, there's been so many moments, like Anastasia was saying, where something's happening in the game that is reflective of what's happening in one of our friends' lives. And it provides a context where, you're with your friends, but you're not in front of phones or disconnected relationally. I felt like this game provided context for me to get to know my friends at a deeper level and see how they would react in different circumstances. But yeah, just like on that point too, Anna and I had moved from Tahoe, where we got married, and we moved down to Carson, and we were going through some health issues, and Anna also just recently got pregnant. And so
congratulations.
Yeah. But it's been really fun because there wasn't too many hobbies that Anna and I had that we could do together. And playing the unseen has provided such a healthy avenue for us to spend time together as a married couple and with our friends. So from somebody who's never been a part of the gaming world, and probably doesn't understand a bunch of things about D&D or dice or whatever, from an outside perspective, it's just provided like such a fun activity for me to have quality time with my friends. So that's something that's like really been valuable to me.
I think that's the thing with gaming in general. I mean, especially with tabletop gaming, video games can do this too, but tabletop gaming, when you can take a complete group of strangers, you can sit around a table. And tabletop gaming is all about solving the puzzle, right? Like, how do you move? Where do you go? Like, what's my next part? What's the objective, right? And then sometimes you have those little debates of like, let me see the rules. And like, it doesn't say that. And it's like, the rules is there written. And you get these kind of debates, but you're all pushed up against the stress wall, and you start to learn each other's personality probably more than you could in any other environment, right? Because you're all working on the same project together, trying to solve this mystery of whatever type of game it is. You know, it might be a train building game, or it might be an adventure game or whatever, but the element is always the same of like, you're pressed up against a healthy stress wall, and you learn people very quickly around a gaming table. Video games will do the same thing, especially when you're playing online, but there's something about that eye-to-eye contact. And I really wanted this game to represent the whole aspect of like, the more you stick together as a team, the more you stay together. Because if you notice, when you're playing the game, the enemy is constantly trying to separate you from the other side of the board, right? So you're like, oh, you're a tight-knit group, and you're pushing through, and you're going through each stronghold. But then all of a sudden this event comes, and it'll take one of your characters, your healer, and send her all the way across the board, and she's lost in a dark zone, and you're like, well, now it's a rescue mission, and it just blew up the whole team. Because now the darkness is starting to come in, and you're just getting surrounded. So you got to make these decisions, and that always alters, and then that's where the angels get really cool. They can come in. But,
and I haven't had much experience playing other games aside from what you've created, Adam. But one thing I feel is unique about this game is I love the aspect of teamwork that it develops, because it's like, it's not you versus another player. It's like when you're fighting this overlying story coming from the board itself. Like, I just think about the way that you've set up the game where you can trade weapons with your partner. Or like, I know when I've played in a campaign too, there's been moments where I'm totally burdened, and somebody will take an effort to go to use all their actions and their prayers to get to me and give me healing and make sure that I'm restored. And it's just like, man, what other context in life apart from like truly the family of God, do you see people sacrifice themselves to make sure you're encouraged?
I had a kid the other day who was playing, and he just wants to murder everything, right? He was playing as Sparrow, so he's sniping everything. So he's out in the street, and he's getting these long shots, and he's got the last shot on the boss, or the monarch of the game. And he's like, if I hit them, but then another friend of his was caught down the other street, and he was completely surrounded. He had one burden left before he got overwhelmed. And he's should I just take the shot on the monarch, or should I go and get my friend out of there and pray for deliverance? He's like, I can do one or the other.
Yeah.
And he's like, he's like, all right, I'll begrudgingly pray for deliverance. You know, he's a teenage kid, and he rolls, and he got him out of there. And then I can't remember how the sequence played out, but by stacking a certain level of abilities, he went 1, 2, 3, and he's like, can I do that? And I'm like, I've never seen anybody combo my rules that way. But yeah, you could totally do that, right? Because those are the best games, is when you figure out how to stack your abilities, right? And he was able to get the kill shot on the guy, rescue his friend at the same time, and an angel came in because he rolled a 20, and it was like this big, huge combo thing. And so he learned this lesson of like, he's like, I should save people more often, man, and like pray for deliverance. Because like, that was awesome.
That was awesome.
So those are cool moments when you see the game come alive like that and stuff. Yeah. And I think all really good games do that to some level. But I did want this game to have edification in it, where it's like, you're going up against an enemy that you don't want to make deals with. You don't want to bargain with these things. You don't want to play with them. You don't want to talk with them. You want them gone. And so I did put a horror element in the game. I didn't want to pull the punches. I've had people come up to me and say, you're just glorifying the enemy. And I said, well, if you got to listen to the whole story. I'm like, there's these very creepy, dark, very morbid scenes in the game that are kind of like, oh, that's extreme. Yeah. What is this rated? But then if you listen through it, it's all about redemption. Every single chapter is like redemption, 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 and you're left with go and know that I'm with you. So the scarier it is, the more powerful you get. And I wanted to do that on purpose because there's a lot of very horrifying games out there, and there's a lot of teenage kids are desensitized and they're playing up against these kinds of things. Not even teenage. I'm desensitized. So like, you know, 40-plus-year-old man, and so I really wanted to play something that was edifying but was competitive with what's out there in the secular world also.
And I appreciated that too, because I didn't grow up in the church, and so I've dealt with things that sometimes you go into a church asking people like, hey, what's going on, help me out, and sometimes it's considered taboo because we don't want to talk about these things. We don't want to talk, like, we don't want to give power to them, you know, and it's like, yeah, but this is a real thing. And so for the first few years of my Christian walk, I felt like I was just crazy because I couldn't find help for the things that I was trying to, you know, shed off and not be a part of that lifestyle anymore. And so being able to see something that has a good balance where it's like, yes, there's these things happening, but we're not playing with them. We're not engaging in them that way. It's just like when a friend is struggling, say fear. Like in my instance, it's like fear, you have no place. Like we were given a spirit of power and of a sound mind and not of fear. And we can declare that. And so it provides that context and there's a good balance of both. And so being able to see something like this, I think is tremendously valuable, not only to the Christian community, but even to people outside of the Christian community who don't understand this yet because, I mean, whether you realize it or not, it's happening, you know? And so for somebody else being able to engage in this, you know, who knows what Holy Spirit might do in their heart, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And one thing too.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say one last thing that is like, I mean, I feel like this is one of the biggest, the powerhouse, the most rich overlay in this game. Adam produced, for me at least, an audio story that follows along every single chapter. And when I first played with him, I was like, cool, we're going to play a board game. And he's got his little...
so much more than that.
He's got his... just playing music on the background on his Bluetooth speaker. And we beat the Monarch in the first chapter, and he just hits play. He doesn't say anything. And all of a sudden, I'm like playing this board game, and now I'm in this, like, the whole room surrounded with what just happened. Narration, and he did all the sound effects. He's, like he said, he's an audio guru. And it was like, oh my goodness, this is so much bigger than a board game. Adam literally thought of an entire experience around the unseen. Everything from the miniatures to how the game plays to your personal character to the audio story. And then on top of that, there's an entire novel based on the unseen that gives you rich context of every single character in the game. And so for me, though, one of the things that is so impactful about the audio story is he created a fictional story of each captive and what they were going through when you liberated them. And man, I can tell you what, like, it's super descriptive, and it's really, really rich in language. And you have like the monarch going into the pit, you know, when you defeat him, and then that audio story overlays into the voice of God and how he interacts with the captive. And man, I saw when we played our campaign with our friends, they would be kind of listening to the audio story, and they're like, "Ooh, that's grotesque! Like, this thing's like sludge is flying out of this guy's head and whatever, and he's being sucked into the pit." And then you see their facial expressions when they're listening to the story, and then as soon as the audio drops off and you hear the voice of God, like, every single person's just silent and involved and present. And I noticed on the faces of my friends, like, I just see them bow their heads. And one of our friends had struggled with a lot of addiction, and we were fighting sickness. And he was the one who ends up slaying the monarch of sickness. And in the story, the one who's the Duke of Sickness, and he's bound by addiction, the sickness of addiction. And
The captive.
The captive is bound by addiction, and he's listening to the audio story of that chapter, and you see him just bow his head, and he's just like shaking his head, and he's like, man,
He starts crying.
He started crying, yeah, this big old tattooed like guy, and he just starts crying, and he's like, I needed that. I really needed that. And it was like, dude, like, that's amazing.
I didn't even know that. That's crazy.
Yeah. So I really feel like, again, I am not a part of the gaming world, but if you haven't played this game, it's not just a board game. It's an entire living experience. And I think that you need to get it, man. Like, this should not be a small business. This should be a massive business, because healthy time with the people you love, engaging in spiritual truths, and it's freaking fun.
Yeah. That's yeah. I did want to just kind of say something, because the CGDC and Brock and all you guys represent such a cool hub for all of these different people that are coming from all these different walks that have the same passion as me and are trying to do these projects. Some of them are more geared towards Christians. Some of them are just like good family values, kind of open. But I know for a fact that all of these creatives out there, I don't care if you're a coder or an audio person or graphic designer or board game designer, don't let the enemy tear you down because like right when you're about to do something big, that's when the enemy is going to hit you the hardest. And so I just want to remind everybody that, like, I did build this game, and I wish I would have done it more communally. I'm not good at social media. I'm terrible at social media.
Yeah.
It gives me the worst anxiety. But, like, to build it, Kickstarter is a big way to do gaming. But I didn't do it that way. But I'm saying all this to say that everybody's in a different walk right now. And there's a huge movement of these types of games coming out. Some of them are released. Some of them are in the works. Like Deliverance, Andrew Lowen, I got to know him. When I saw Deliverance come up for the first time, the enemy actually struck me down. Like, I got hit so hard with, like, somebody already did it, and he's like way ahead of me, and I just need to stop. I just need to quit. And my friend's like, what are you talking about? And then one guy came up to me and he's like, I know Andrew's number. Here, call this guy. And I'm like, I can't call him. And then God just kind of revealed to me, it's like, you're not in competition with these people. Yeah. You guys are playing the same game on a different field. Yeah. And as I got to talking to Andrew, we started having those same feelings. We're just going back and forth. And he's like, dude, I just saw your game yesterday. I was going to buy a copy of it. And I'm like, what? I'm like, I want to buy your copy right now. And I played Deliverance, and I loved it, And I'm like, this is so awesome. Like, if I had never made a board game, I'd be so into that game. And there's tons of games that are out there that are like that. So I just wanted to say to people who are in the middle of making it, don't stop. Don't stop. Like, when it's hardest to pray harder. Yeah. Because you'll come through it. You'll get through it. Yeah. And so
that, like, the message needs to be created.
Because I really just want to edify people. Where they're at, no matter what they're doing, and that's what this game was designed to do. It's like, have a good time, but know that like these enemies are very real. Not making light of it. I'm just kind of giving you context on how maybe you can fight it on your own, because the game pushes you up against that wall of like, I'm dealing with hatred right now. Like I hate somebody in my life, and it's like, all right, well, slay this thing.
Yeah.
And just know that it's not the person, but maybe it's just the enemy trying to tear you apart, or something like that. Like you said, it'll speak to people where they're at, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's really important what you just said about we're not in competition. We're on the same team, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I am curious, what other opposition you came up against while making this, or even while it's out. Have you mentioned that one person from within the church that kind of pushed back or didn't like the horror element of the game?
I think that like when you start to stir up the spirit world, there's a lot of different arrows that come at you from different ways. One example, man, there's some bad ones. Let me see. I don't want to spend too much time on the details of it. One gentleman came up to me at one point, and I had just released the game, and I said, hey, I went to my pastor. I said, hey, you think it'd be cool if I could just like set up in the lobby for a couple of weeks and just do like a little release thing and then sell the game or whatever. And I was even just kind of giving most of that back to the church anyways.
Yeah.
And this guy comes up to me.
And you're on staff there?
Yeah, I'm the worship leader at the church. Yeah, I've been there for about 10 years doing worship leading. Okay. And so this older gentleman comes up to me at one point. And, he comes up to me. I go, hey, how you doing, man? He's like, I'm not doing too good. And I go, really? And he's like, this is disgusting. And he started like screaming at me and accusing me of making a profit off of like God. And he's like, you come in here and you're showing off all your stuff or whatever. He's like, this is disgusting. And people were literally like leaving the room because he was making such a scene. And I said, look, man, let me just come over and show you what I'm doing. And I was trying to pull him over there. He's like, I know exactly what you're doing. And he's like, it's dark and it's disgusting. And I said, look, I didn't make this game for you, And I was trying to tell him, I said, there's a formula. Like you can go get somebody and we can have a conversation like in private and we can discuss what's going on. But like, don't come at me like this. And ultimately, I don't know. My wife, my adrenaline was so high that I don't remember what I said. But my wife said, you handled that masterfully. And I'm like, I have no idea what I just said because I feel like I got in a fist fight. But he tore me down. And one of the things I said, really, when's the last time you spent $80 on a Bible? You know what I mean? I'm like, it takes money to produce these things. And I also told him, I said, hey, look, if I sell every single one of the copies that I made, I'm not going to even make a profit. Yeah. Like, I'm hoping to just make enough to be able to keep doing this and do more, That wasn't enough for him. And that tore me apart for like 6 months. I was like, why am I doing this? Kind of threw me into this huge pit. And there was another lady that came up to me and she read my book, about half of it. And she goes, that's not how spiritual warfare works. And I go, I understand. And I explained very clearly in the front of the book that this is an allegory. This is a work of fiction. And it's not so much like this is exactly how spiritual warfare looks. It's just this is an allegory of what it feels like and how you can fight it. And so that's what's really important, like you said about the book the other day, is that there's a point in the story where you're in the fantasy world, you're in this, not fantasy world, you're in this spiritual world and you're fighting through these things. But at one point in the story, it's like they come out, they close their books, they come out of the unseen. They're like, we have to engage. We have to take action. So the preparation, the prayer, the spiritual warfare, all that stuff's really important. But if you're not engaging in the real world, you're kind of doing a disservice. And that was a point that I bring home in the book of like, this is now it's getting real now. Now we have to engage.
It's one thing to fight in prayer for your community and for your family and for your friends. It's another thing to take what you heard in prayer and bring that to their doorstep and bring them a bag of groceries and love on them and pray for them or whatever. Yeah. And Adam in this story has done such a beautiful job of really weaving the value of, I think God, Holy Spirit through you, man, has done such a good job of weaving the importance of prayer and connection with the Lord, and the importance of impacting on a real physical level.
So in my imagination, when I first started this, I'm like, I'm going to make this game, and Christians are going to love it, and they're going to eat it up like candy. And it's just like the game that everybody wanted, right? And then, like, you know, I'm watching Star Wars, and I hear Han Solo say, "Delusions of grandeur," right? And I'm like, so I put this thing out there, and you know, people are excited. I got my circle around me, and there's people buying it. And there's people, when people play it, they love it and everything else. But getting it out there and then getting lost in the sea of fish and trying to figure out how to get people to play it, that starts getting very, like, it's like tick damage. You know, you start going down and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't really figure out what am I doing. And every time I play the game, I had a point here. The point was being
when people you thought in the church that would just jump on.
The people that you thought were going to be on your side are not, and then the people that you never thought would be on your side come out of the woodworks. And so I thought this game was going to be for the church, which I think it very much is.
Yeah.
But I've had a lot of people just secularly love this game in itself because I really didn't want it to be preachy. You know, I didn't want it to be real churchy, and like there's no mention of a church building in my game anywhere. It's just people living their life and fighting. And so I really wanted it to be something that people could play no matter where you're at in life. I don't care if you're Christian, if you're a non-Christian or whatever, you can relate to doubt, guilt, fear, sickness, suffering, and hatred. You can just relate to that. And so that was an interesting thing to me of watching how a lot of Christians would come in and they would just be like, that's weird, or that's too dark, or I don't like that. But then I would have some, like you said, I had this one guy come in I was playing D&D with. We were playing Dungeons & Dragons. And he was like, oh, you made a game? I want to come over and check it out. And this dude's like 6'5", tattoos all over him and coming up in my house. I mean, I'm just like looking at this tower of a man. And it was a similar situation. We got through, it was dealing with his daughter. I think it was guilt. Anyways, after the story was over, I just saw like his eyes were closed and there's like tears coming down his neck. He's like, dude, he's like, this isn't a game, bro. And I'm like, what? And he's like, this isn't a game. He's like, this is like life altering.
Wow.
And I said, well, that's just Christ, man. Like Christ is in the game. That's what's making it life altering.
Yep.
And he's like, I want to know everything. Like, and then he ended up giving his life to Christ because he had a connection with the character in the game and it broke him. Like he's just like, and then he's like, can I just like play? And he's like, I'll call in tomorrow. Let's do 2 more chapters. And I'm like, all right. And we went till 2 a.m.
Wow.
playing. We started at like 6 in the afternoon. We went till 2 a.m. So, you know, you got to like remember those things when you're developing something, you're making something. It's like, you tend to forget the good stuff and you get so caught up on the negative stuff and it'll crush you.
Yeah.
You know?
I want to ask on your design process, what did that look like? You mentioned that God was talking to you about like drawing and buying an iPad and stuff. What about the actual design of the game?
So when, have you ever heard of the game Zombicide?
Yeah.
It's like a tabletop dungeon crawler or whatever. That's what got me into board gaming with like that type nature type board. I'm like, this is like the funnest thing ever and had a sandbox element to it. And I just started kind of like role playing with it, and I started making my own characters. I'm like, I'm gonna bring Marvel characters, and this is long before Marvel and Zombicide. And I just started like making my own characters. And Linda's like, well, you're really good at the graphic design and like building new rules and stuff. Why don't you just make your own game, right? So that took off, and I'm like, okay, I want it to be a dungeon crawling experience. And so what I started with was I really wanted it to be you versus the board. And I knew that was the case, but I didn't want it to be like anything else that I had played, right? So I stopped playing all other types of board games, which in hindsight, I'm like, maybe that was a mistake. Because over time I learned that R&D is a really big deal. Like when you go out and you kind of study what is good and why people like it, and you start integrating that. But I was like, I knew I wanted a new dice system. I knew I wanted polyhedral dice. I knew I wanted I wanted more miniatures than I actually had, but the cost, you know. So I knew the story, and I told my wife in the very beginning, I said the mechanics have to reflect the story. And so it started with the characters. So I go, who is Juniper? Who is Sparrow? Who is River? And once I had their background and their story, and I'm like, all right, so as you're playing the game, I want their abilities and the stuff that they do to match their characteristics and their personality. So like Samsonia, she's just a fireball. Like she runs out there and she's this blind warrior that sees in the spirit, and she's like blades and axes, and she's just in your face, right? So I'm like, she's my glass cannon. I want her to be heavy hitter. She may go down a little easier, but her problem is that she tends to move faster than the rest, and she can get herself cut off from the rest of the group, even though she's doing a massive amount of damage. So things like that, I really wanted that to play out. And I also wanted every enemy in the game to have a unique ability as far as they strike back. So every time they came out, I wanted you to come up against a random thing that you didn't know how it was going to come at you. So it's like, I'm going to attack this thing. Well, what's going to happen? I don't know yet. And I love the idea of a reveal, like the fog of war kind of concept. It's like, we're going to tear down this stronghold. And that's the fun part with people when I play with new people, even at conventions, is once they're playing, they're like, okay, it's kind of cool. I'm rolling. I get a 12. I kind of killed something. All right. And then they knock down that stronghold, and an event happens, and then the whole room fills up with enemies, and they're like, what have we done? They're like grabbing their face. They're like, how do we fight that? And I'm like, that's my favorite moment, is when they kick the door down and they see what's behind it, and they're like, this sucks, right? So, can you say that on television? So, anyways, yeah, that kind of thing. So I really wanted the fog of war element. I wanted that, and I really wanted each character to be very unique from each other. And I definitely wanted angels. And the angel thing was really interesting, because in the beginning I had more angels, and then I had multiple types of angels. I even had like a female angel in there at one point. But then there was this huge argument amongst a bunch of people about like male or female angels and whether they're humanoid or they're not, and they had animals. And I'm like, you know what? I don't even want to get in a theological debate about angels. So I'm like, I'm just going to play it safe. I'm just going to do male angels for right now. I'm just going to stay out of that pool, because I wanted angels to be in the game, but I didn't want it to be about angels, right? Yeah. I wanted it to be about a personal struggle. And then Andrew puts his game out, and there's like female angels. I'm like, all right, cool, man.
He did it.
Like, he can handle that one. Like, that's all right. Cool, I'll play that game. So things like that. As far as like the mechanics, I really built off of people's opinions. So I'd bring in 6 people, play through 4 or 5 chapters, and I would just watch them where they got frustrated. They're like, yeah, I just feel like I'm stuck, man. I'm like, okay, I gotta fix that. And then I would bring in another person, and they'd be like, okay, that felt a little long, and I don't like how when you're sick, this and this and this happens. And I'm like, okay. And so I would allow myself to not be offended and take people's like experience as they're playing the game as a way to restructure the game. Mm-hmm. So at first I'm like, oh, I'm going to make this game. Everybody's just going to love it, right? That's just not the case, because you have all these different personalities. Yeah. I had one person come in, they sat down and they played, and I'm like, okay, so our objective is to go and knock this door down. And every single time I said something, she's like, why? Why? And I'm like, well, because that's the objective. That's how you get to the next part of the game. She's like, but why? And I'm like, hey, what is she asking me? Like, she's never played any video. Like, super confused. Yeah, exactly.
Because like, there's a captive in there we need to liberate. Come on.
But until she like went through 3 or 4 rounds, I don't think she really likes board games, because she didn't like how she took the dice personal. She's like, I rolled a 7 like 3 times. She was like, I hate dice. Right? So I'm like, okay, I can't change the game because she hates dice. So I'm just gonna move on. So you just got to be careful and like not take things personal. But one guy came in, and he's like a big time board game guy. He was a friend of a friend of a friend. He came in and he played, and he was just like stone cold the whole time. And he goes, yeah, man. He's like, this game's broke. And I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, I just feel like I'm stuck the whole time. And he ripped my game apart. Like, he tore it to pieces. And I was like, oh my gosh, it was like such a gut punch. And I got mad for a minute. And then a couple of days went by, and I'm like, I got to restructure the game. Wow. Like, I'm like, I got to redo it, because it was like a football field kind of style thing where you're cross shooting. And I'm like, I got away from what I wanted to do. I wanted an exploring game. And I went, and it took me like 2 weeks. And Linda's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I got to rewrite the whole thing. It's got to be an adventure. It's got to be like, what's around the next corner? And after I did that, even my friend Don came in. He's like, this is so much better, man. He's like, the first time, he's like, it didn't feel like a battle game. It felt like a card game. And I'm like, oh, interesting. And so, yeah, just listening to people was a huge part of the creative process. Not allowing what I wanted to overtake what was actually fun, which is hard to do as a creative, you know, because you're trying to make the game you want to play. Yeah. But then if somebody then they have a bad experience, you kind of got to weigh that a little bit and go, all right, and so just balancing in. And then my wife is very, very, very critical. I'm a words of affirmation person. Like, if people don't tell me I'm just awesome all the time, I'm like, what's happening? What's wrong? And my wife's like, no, that's broken. I don't like that. I'm like, what do you like? So my wife has been really good at, like, just pushing the boundaries of, like, it's going to be good. It's going to be good, but you got to fix this. This is broken.
Huh.
Yeah.
So that's kind of cool. Is that kind of what your question was? Or did I get there?
No, there's a lot of good stuff in there. I'm curious what God has taught you personally through the journey of making a game.
Oh, wow. How do I put that down? It changed me. Yeah. I'll tell you that. It changed me. So as I was progressing the game, I've always been a gamer. Like, I've put in 1,500 hours into Destiny 1 year. And like I play video games like crazy. I play board games like nuts. And I've always just kind of loved hosting. And then God's like, I want you to write a book. And I'm like, I think I've read 4 books in my life, Lord
of the Rings.
And most of them were Narnia books. So I'm not a writer, God's like, write a book. And I'm like, I don't want to write a book. I want to make a comic book. He's like, you're not going to make a comic book. And so I start drawing. I start doing all this stuff. And what was really cool is watching the people around me react to what I was doing, right? Mm-hmm. So I was in a band for 10 years. They're like, you're never going to be famous, right? So I was in a garage band. But we did some cool stuff. But that defined my life for a long time. And I wanted to take Pure Crimson, the name of my band. I'm like, this is the name of my company, Pure Crimson. So I put that on there, which means Christ's blood, right? So I was like, Pure Crimson, that's a cool name. And as I was going through, I just kept hitting these, like, faith walls of, like, I really wanted to do miniatures. Well, I can't afford it. So I'm going to do cardboard stand-ups. And then one guy came in. He's like, you ever just say yes?
Wow.
Because, like, God has all these things he wants to give you. He wants to lay all this stuff out. He's like, have you ever just, like, looked at what you wanted for the game and took God for his word and said yes?
Wow.
And I was like, I think I know what you're saying. And I said, okay, yes, I want miniatures. And he's like, I'm just going to you're going to have miniatures in this game. And I am not kidding. Through multiple circumstances that I'm not going to get into, 1 week later, I had the exact amount of money that I needed to have a 3D model artist make the miniatures and have them finished within a month.
Wow.
I had 3D miniatures. And that was such a cool moment for me because I'm like, okay, so this is my art. And I'm comparing my art against other people's art, right? I'm like, I'll never be that good. Yeah. And that kind of like made me, I'm highly critical of my stuff. But when somebody took my art and turned it into a 3D model, and I'm like, wow, I'm making toys. Like my favorite thing in the world. Like I love miniatures. And my art got turned into this thing, and all I had to do was say yes. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's such an important thing for somebody who's trying to do a project based on their faith, of just like that moment where you're like, this really takes a lot of faith in acting. Like I got to act this out, but at the same time, it really is God's project.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to say yes and allow him to do it and kind of get out of the way while still trying to be the person who's doing the act, right?
Yeah.
So it's like a metaphor for faith. So you're like, all right, well, I'm going to depend wholly upon you, God, but I don't have the motivation to get out of bed. So is that my problem or is that your problem?
Yeah.
So you're constantly in that shifting thing. And then I started thinking more about the spiritual warfare. I'm like, I'm making a game about doubt, guilt, fear, sickness, suffering, hatred, and angels and demons and deliverance and power. And so the enemy's like, oh, that's cool. Here you go. Here's life. Bam. So as I'm making the game, I'm being hit harder with the monarchs in this game than any other time in my life. It's still happening more than any other time in my life. So to say that I've grown spiritually since making a game about spiritual warfare would be a gross understatement.
Yeah.
Because not just me, but my wife, the people around me, my dad, being a very critical person that he is, I would draw a picture. I would sit there and I remember laying in bed at like 2:00 in the morning. I'm drawing this picture of a lion and I'm like, look at it. And I just start getting teary eyed. I'm like, how did I do that? And I showed my wife the next morning and she's like, you drew that? And she didn't believe that I drew it. And so I showed my dad, and my dad's like, "You didn't draw that. You traced that." And I'm like, "I didn't trace it, Dad. Like, okay, I've seen The Lion King a few times. I had some inspiration, but I didn't trace it." You know? And he's like, "Wow." And then I would show him another picture, and he's like, "Whoa." And then I drew a picture that was based off of his image, and he's like, "Oh, I'm like a superhero now." And so just watching the people around me react to things that they didn't know that I was capable of,
Right.
was kind of huge, because I'm like, I'm drawing again, and I'm doing this. And then I had the game in a box, and now I'm in the business phase of the game, which is extraordinarily difficult for me because it's just not how my brain works, you know? And so I'm just trying to like, all right, let's get the game out there. And then you start talking about it, and you start to wear yourself out on like what it is. So you forget. So I start playing other games, or I start making other projects. I start doing all this stuff, and I forget what the unseen is. And then I sit down and I play with people like you guys or whoever, and I'm like, I step back and I'm like, how did I make this? And that's the moment where I'm like, that's a huge faith thing, because a lot of the times I don't know how I got from step A to step B or 1 to 6, right? I just don't know how I got there. And I'll look back and I'm just like, wow. And I remember one time I was trying to figure out how to do dimensions with my characters. I'm like, I don't know how to get a hand to reach out like this and do this. And I saw my nephews one day, and I'm like, oh my gosh, just like hold still. Here, hold this baseball bat. And so I went and I got my phone and I took a picture of them. And then I used that outline of my nephews to like have a bat. And by drawing using that photograph, I was able to like understand dimension more. And so God would like reveal these things to me, these little techniques on how to do it. And
here it is.
And then there it is. Yeah. And my nephews all the time, like, he's like, yeah, I'm Key. And then he reads the book and he's like, that's not me. I'm like, no, that's not. I just used the visuals, man. That's not you. You are not that explosive. But
so what have you been doing to get the game out, and where can people get it?
You can get it on my website at theunseen.game.com.
Unseengame.com. Okay.
Yeah, and that's the only place I have to get it at the moment. You can also buy my novel from there. And what have I been doing since then? Well, my wife had to go back to work. She took a year off, and then she had to go back to work. And so I've been kind of striving to kind of just like do what I can to get out there. So honestly, between now, last year, just before Christmas, I lowered the price of the game a little bit, because I just felt like it just needed to come down because we just weren't getting the responses. And so we've been hitting a lot of conventions. So I feel like we do really good. Like last year we went to San Diego Comic-Con. We do local conventions. There's CGDC. We're going there. We were going to go to San Diego Comic-Con again, but I missed you guys so bad. Last time I didn't go, because going to the CGDC is so edifying when you get around so many people that are so passionate about, you know what I mean? Like it's really cool. And they're all from different parts of development, you know, some of them are graphic designers. So anyways, just doing stuff like this, trying to get people to do videos for me, getting people to talk about the game. It's really challenging. Like I said, social media is really challenging for me for some reason. I have a really hard time with it, but I know that that's how you do it. So that's just kind of where I'm at. As far as like future projects, I do have a sequel to the game that is playable at this point. It's called Sebastian's Labyrinth. And
are you bringing that to CGDC?
I can. Yeah, to show it off. Yeah, for sure. It's a very different experience. It's for sure. It has a moving map. So like you're lost in a labyrinth. If you read the novel, you'll have more context for what it is. But every time you move from one square to another, the labyrinth will shift and flip and move. And so as you're moving through it, you're trying to unravel the labyrinth and find these different fruits and keys to unlock the next chapter and go up the labyrinth scale. And the whole time you're being hunted by these wolves.
Okay.
And the wolves can corrupt you, and you can become a wolf yourself. And then you have to kind of use your friends to get your friend who has become a wolf back into the fold. And so it's a very different game, but I want it to be able to be standalone but crossover.
Okay.
So when it does eventually come out, I do want it to be able to like, hey, you can buy this game. Hey, if you like it, play the Unseen, or vice versa, and then you can mix and match the characters.
Nice.
So that's really important to me.
So you said
and then
you're not good at social. Where can people follow you?
you can follow me on our Unseen Game Facebook, which I'm going to be getting more active on that here very shortly. I'm going to be making some more how to play videos. That's another thing too, is if you get onto my website, there is tons of videos that I've made of how to play and how to get into the game. Also, you can get a hold of me through the website itself. So if you go to the website and you contact me by email, I'll respond to you immediately. I'm really good at that. So, but we are a business of two people. So it's me mostly, and then my wife helps me where she can. She does the editing and stuff like that, but it's just the two of us.
Yeah.
So there's nobody else involved. And so the Unseen Game. Oh, we do have a page on there. My wife, I wish she was here. Linda. Anyways, Champions of the Unseen on Facebook is where you can get of us and post stuff. If you like the game and you're playing it, or you have questions, or you just want to post some pictures or whatever, that's our group page. So Champions of the Unseen through Facebook. And
we've posted there.
Yeah.
We'll make sure to post all those links in the under the video. So
okay, and I can send those to you via text too. Also. All right,
so good.
We covered a lot.
We did.
Yeah, this has been so fun. Adam, Benjamin, Anastasia, thank you so much. It's been awesome talking to you. Is there anything else you want to plug before we go, Adam?
No, I think I kind of covered everything.
Just be like us. Just buy the game before you've ever played it, and just go for it. Jump in full force. It's the best experience.
Oh, another thing. If you do buy the game and you do hey, I want to check this out, don't be afraid to contact me. Just get on my website, scroll down, find our email, and just get a hold of me, and I'll totally chat with you, knock off all of the questions or whatever. Because getting into a dungeon crawling style game this big can be a little intimidating.
Sure. There are a lot of elements, but having the many elements is what makes it fun.
It is true.
So
it's so rich. Yep.
Well, thank you so much for this time. I really enjoyed it.
All right. Thank you.
It's been awesome. Thanks for doing what you do too.